Welcome in, everybody, to Inside the Burrow. Robbie Listella, Kevin Fielder back here on Inside the Burrow, joining you after the end of FAU's football season as the Owls lost in unceremonious fashion last weekend to ECU. Won't dole too much on that as the offseason is already upon us. Kevin, welcome back to the show. How's it going?
I'm excited to be talking about something other than like a loss. Just kind of got a little frustrated, not gonna lie, but a new chapter ahead is what I would like to think about it. So,
Yeah, never an easy game there down the stretch on Thanksgiving when you're not playing for much and you're playing in front of 10 people. And obviously, it didn't seem like they had the juice out of the gates. Just not going to go your way. And it didn't go their way at all to close out the season there. But Kevin, in today's college football landscape, you can't dull on that last game of the season anymore, as the transfer portal, as we have seen, is already moving. We heard Coach Kitley talk about in the press conference that Caden Veltkamp will be back, confirmed by not Caden necessarily, but by Kitley for sure. And also mentioned that Caden will most likely have shoulder surgery. So, Kevin, how big is it for FAU to at least have some form of continuity in the form of their quarterback, head coach going into next season from that duo?
I think it's the most important thing that you can have because I know that some people are going to be frustrated with the way that Kitten Veldkamp played down the stretch. And I don't disagree with them. I think there were too many turnovers. I think there were too many turnover-worthy plays. But the truth is, what's the solution to that? Is it to go out to the portal and spend another ton of money on a quarterback because you're not happy with the one you have and hope that the next one is better? Like, the truth is, you can't keep chasing that. You can't just keep chasing that, hoping it's there. Because eventually it won't be there. That well's going to dry up, and you're going to be left with an awful situation at quarterback. Western Kentucky, to some degree, kind of experienced that this year with the fact that they went after Maverick McIver. I think he got hurt. They go towards Rodney Tisdale, their backup. He's just not as good. And so that sort of quarterback trend that they had where every year they were just getting a new quarterback in from, Bailey Zappi to Austin Reed to Caden Veldkamp to now Maverick McIver, the well just eventually dries out. You can't keep hitting 100% on every single quarterback move that you want to make. And so keeping head coach, keeping quarterback in place, that gives you a good core to build around. Now you sort of start trying to fill in the gaps around them because Lord knows there are going to be some holes that need to be filled for FAU.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be some departures. We've already seen it. We'll get to the guys who have left here in a second, but we heard from Easton Messer in the post game. He was a guy who was definitely uncommitted to next season, at least in his comments after the game. Said he was mostly focused on this season, not much of a multitasker. From what I've heard, it seemed like there was some type of I don't know how to describe it because I didn't see it, but something went on with Assad Wasim on the sideline after the game. He was upset about something. So, 2 weeks ago, I would say, based off what he and Caden said, that he'd 100% be back. I don't know for sure. I don't know how deep that, what went on there on the sidelines was. And then, we haven't heard anything from Jay Sean Platt yet in regards to next season at all. Kevin, I feel like the one thing, though, and at least that I'm kind of confident in here is that the wide receiver room, even if, there's a departure, I don't know how well they'd be able to recover if the entire room gets squad wiped here. But, if there's a guy or two that get picked here, I feel like Zach Kitley can definitely, although it'd be harder to do at quarterback, I think receiver is a room where he can go out and find guys to kind of plug and play. Plus, there's some guys that are still going to be in that room to develop. How concerned should people be if there's a departure in that wide receiver room?
If there's one or two, I don't think you're as concerned. If it's all three leaving, I think you start to hit the panic button a little bit. I think that they've added some guys through high school recruiting, through the transfer portal, or through junior college recruiting that at least leave me encouraged about what that room could look like next year. But you don't want to be in a position where you have two true freshmen out there. You have Braden Hawk, who I think will have a big role next year, and Braden Hawk is ready for that big role. But you don't want to be in a position where you're just kind of like hoping that Braden Hawk develops, that a couple other true freshmen develop. You would like to be in a situation where Hawk can develop alongside a guy like Easton Messer, or alongside a guy like Easton Messer and Jay Sean Platt, so that all the focus isn't on a player trying to take that next step. And it's just kind of an added benefit when that happens. But if you lose one guy, it's not panic button time. You can go into the portal, you can replace him, or you can trust that the junior college guys that you add and then the high school recruiting guys that you add can help fill it out. But if they lose all three, this is going to be a different tune on the podcast. And I'll be saying, yeah, you can be worried a little bit, because it's tough to replace all three in any room, especially when it's one that's going to be so important for FAU.
Yeah. I agree with you there. I definitely don't, like I said, I don't think the squad wipe would be ideal in any scenario there. But I will say, if they, I feel like any single person at wide receiver is replaceable. And you mentioned Brandon. Jade Card is another guy in that room next year who could potentially be poised for a bigger role, especially if one of the outside receivers depart. So there's definitely talent there, and I think that's a room where I think they can go out and grab a portal guy. They definitely didn't hit on all the guys they brought in. You never do. J.R. Wilson, Quincy Brown, to me, were two guys who I went into the season with pretty high expectations, and they kind of just eventually got hurt, and we never really saw them again. And I'm interested to kind of see if there isn't any departures, what they do if they bring in any portal pieces at all. In that room, there is a JUCO guy and a high school guy we'll get to talk about here in just a moment. But I'm interested to see how they approach that wide receiver room. We'll talk about the tight end. They address that through the junior college ranks. I'm sure they'll have another addition. But to me, what I'm going to be watching on the offensive side of the ball this offseason is how they rebuild that offensive line, and then the defense. I think the defense is going to see a lot of new pieces from on all three levels of the ball. Kevin, I talked about this with Ken. We talk about this online. The premise of potentially changing defensive coordinator there, that's gotten a lot of discussion online. It doesn't look to me like that's something that will happen here. I feel like it would have probably already happened. But from a sense of continuity, what's your thoughts? Do you feel like it would be too early to make a defensive coordinator change, or is that something Kitley could evaluate right now?
I think that's something that they have to evaluate. I mean, I think you self-scout every staff member and everything in the room after you go 4-8. That doesn't mean you fire everyone. That doesn't mean you change anything, right? It just means you have to self-scout and see where it went wrong so that it doesn't happen again. The truth is, regardless of who the defensive coordinator is next year, whether it's Brett Dewhurst, whether it's someone else, I do sort of tend to agree that it will likely be Brett Dewhurst next year. There needs to be additions to the defensive room, and there needs to be guys who can contribute immediately, because not only are you losing a lot, but you just need upgrades. I think that became abundantly clear that like the defense that you were running out there this season is not a defense that is going to win you whatever the expectation is in terms of games won in the American. And so I think the bigger focus right now has to be on who's heading into that room, who's going to help change what happened last year so that you're not allowing 45 points in a game, right? You're trying to get that down, because I'm sure we've talked about it before, right? Like, yeah, your offense can score 35 points, but 35 points is not enough when your defense allows 40. Like, this is just simple math at some point. The defense has to be better, much like the offense has to be better, right? Like, I think when you go 4-8, there are very few rooms where you just kind of feel like did their job completely. And so I think the truth is, right, like when you look at it, the biggest thing has to be, what does that room look like? Because it doesn't matter who's coaching. If you're bringing out that same defense, you're going to have the same results. Like, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result.
Yeah, no, I think they'll definitely consider it. I mean, we've heard Kitley talk about he'll consider everything. He said before the season in a podcast appearance that he'd consider bringing in a play caller if it didn't go well. I don't think that's going to be considered. But point being, I think they will consider everything, and if that's what if he believes firing Dewhurst is the best course of action, he'll do it. If not, he won't. I'm interested to see though in terms of the coaching staff whether they bring in a veteran, analyst position coach. I feel like DJ McCarthy, Coach Schwann's on the defensive side of the ball are pretty much your two veterans. That's it. Coach Perk at running back. That's about it. Really. And then the rest of these guys are young, up and coming coaches who, that's not a bad thing. Those are the best types of coaches that you can find if you can find them before they blow up. But, I do think a veteran will potentially help next year. I'm Rock Bellantoni's available. Auburn just let him go, but great guy. I hope he does land on his feet. I hope I don't know if that'll be at FAU or not, but it does seem like Golesh made a bit of a poor decision there. But that's neither here nor there. But whether it's Bellantoni or another type of older defensive mind that can kind of help Dewhurst out on that defensive side of the ball, I think that'd be a valued addition. It was his first year, and I just don't see who he leans on that defensive side of the ball for leadership outside of Coach Aaron Schwann's linebacker coach. I don't know who else he would really lean on. So you feel like that's a route that they could take is bringing in a veteran coach on that defensive side of the ball, or do you think that would help butt head? Do you think that would make them butt heads?
That typically is the approach that a lot of coaches have taken from my experience, right? Is when you hire someone who's inexperienced to be the play caller, you want someone else who you trust, who they trust, that can sort of be like, hey, this probably isn't the play we should run. Hey, we should do this instead of this, right? Like you want someone to bounce ideas off of. I'm constantly reminded of like the Sean McVay tree in the NFL. And when we talk about the Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan tree, it's all those head coaches who once shared a room in Washington and in Atlanta and in San Francisco to some degree. And what they've all said, from Kyle Shanahan down to like Mike McDaniel with the Dolphins, is that they all thrived because they weren't afraid of different opinions. They weren't afraid if another coach was like, hey, this isn't the play call, or hey, we should do X instead of Y, because those differing opinions often lead to more success. It's very hard to succeed with yes men. And this is not me saying that the FAU coaching staff is yes men, right? But it's just like hypothetically, veteran coaches have an understanding of what works and what doesn't work. They've seen a lot of things. And I think that is probably a smart thing for FAU in general, is to just add more veteran coaches on staff so that you can sort of bounce ideas off of it. You can have someone in the room who sort of knows what happens in college football, right? And it's like it's the ability to be able to sit there and go like, hey, what would you call here? Or hey, how would you approach this? And it's just kind of continuing to learn, because the truth is, Brett Dewhurst, while I think he is certainly not, the biggest issue of all time, he is an inexperienced defensive coordinator. This was his first year calling plays, and I think you saw that at times. And so I think the biggest solution to that is to just add more experience, guys who understand what needs to happen so that some of the issues that he may have are solved by having more experience in that room.
Yeah. I joke about Bellantoni, but that's the type of coach that that would fit perfectly in an analyst type of role. And I think, that was part of the reason why, they originally retained Bellantoni as, I believe it was outside linebackers coach in this current regime. And it was outside linebackers and a scouting type role, I believe, on this team. So, I don't know anything for sure, but, that would be an addition that could help on the defense side of the ball. And you look at the offensive side of the ball, maybe they bring in a veteran coach for Kitley to lean on the offensive side of the ball. It's really just him and Trent Vasey as quarterbacks coach that kind of handle everything. That'd be interesting to kind of see if they bring in a third mind in there to kind of help the offense smooth out a little bit, because I do think at times it felt like, Kitley was having too much on his plate, whereas at the end of the season, it looked like where the defense was the one that the wheels were falling off. So lot to see this offseason, whether that's departures or coaching staff additions. Before we get into our new additions expected, at least tomorrow is National Signing Day. We have had a couple transfer portal entries. I'll start off here. We had today backup defensive back LJ Hall, wide receiver Jabari Smith had a big role last year. He's both of those guys entering the transfer portal. Defensive back Cam Goggins entering the transfer portal, as well as the biggest one so far is former starting right tackle Daughtry Richardson. Missed the final 3 games of this season. He announced he'll be entering the transfer portal as well. So a couple guys there, most notably Richardson, Goggins, and Jabari Smith played a lot more last year. Those were Goggins was a big Herman guy he was Georgia Military College, the alumni. So best of luck to all the guys who are departing. And I'm sure potentially we'll see more. That's how the world works. I hope not, but it's early. Don't get too comfortable. Stay frosty. Never expect the unexpected in this crazy college world. But in terms of new additions, we've been getting them left and right here. We've been getting some high schoolers in. We've been getting a lot of transfer portal from the junior college ranks. We saw that work here this season. We saw a couple guys come right away from the junior college ranks and make an impact. You look at Kamari Johnson played a big role at linebacker. Terez Reed wasn't. He was from Grand Valley State last year, but previously played at a junior college. So they're having success finding these diamond in the rough type takes. Kevin, as a person who has been dabbling in the scouting industry, for a lack of better words, the diamond in the rough approach that FAU has been taking, what's your thoughts on it? Is that a sustainable approach recruiting wise for FAU? I'm not saying that every junior college player is necessarily a diamond in the rough, but it does look like that's kind of what they are looking for out of a junior college player.
Yeah, truthfully, when you get to this part of like you're building a roster, right, and you have to fill 105 guys with the new rev share deal, the truth is when you're FAU, when you're any group of 5 program, you've got to get creative. You can't just go fill 60 spots in the transfer portal with D1 guys. You have to add D2 guys. You have to add junior college guys. You have to develop from high school. That's kind of just what has to happen. And I think that's the biggest key for a school like FAU, right, is continuing to do that so that when we get to the point of having to add through the transfer portal, you're not adding 60 guys, you're adding maybe 20 guys, right? You're adding just fewer guys in general. And the truth is, like, junior college guys can contribute immediately if you get the right junior college guys. D2 guys, and FAU's added 2 D2 guys, can develop and play immediately. There are pathways for those guys to play immediately. I think we saw it with Terez Reed this year, who was a starting corner. You can't just expect to fill a roster with just high school and transfer portal guys like you're Miami, because you're not Miami, right? You have to get creative. You have to find different ways to fill 105 spots. And I think that's where the junior college comes into rank. That's where under-recruited guys come into play. That's how you've got to get creative to fill a roster. And I think FAU is doing a good job of that.
Yeah, NIL is something that's never been super publicized at FAU. It's kind of been hush-hush. Obviously, I don't think they're down in the dumps necessarily, but I also don't think we have a FedEx plane dropping off the Brinks truck here either. So you're right. They're getting creative. They're doing different things. Obviously, I'm sure Caden and Easton Messer did last season, commanded a big chunk of NIL money. I'm sure they took a little bit of a discount too to come play for Kitley. But point being, they have to find ways to get creative with a little bit of top heaviness there with your top talent. And so I feel like that's there goes my light. But I feel like that's a smart way for them to kind of balance the I won't say lack of NIL, but I'll say I'm going to break this light. The overabundance, the non-overabundance of NIL. But before we dive into the high school side of things, I think we will start with the transfer portal because I'm sure we'll see more transfer portal news pop up here soon, but we have gotten some fairly big additions. You mentioned the D2 guys, Kevin. I want to start with them. Leonard Farrell at running back, Kenyon Garner at edge. There's some talent there. There's some true talent, and those are positions of need for FAU. Both of them. They did not, as usual. Unfortunately, the trend has been, although it was better in my opinion. I do think rushing the passer this year was better than years past. I thought we saw the breakout of Josh Roberts as a potential future star, but I do think that room needs help, and I think Garner showed, although at the D2 level, he is a force. His numbers are ridiculous. And Leonard Farrell at running back as well. We needed backs this year. And he's a guy who produced at Fairmont State. Kevin, what do you like from our D2 transfers so far?
Yeah, so let's start with Leonard Farrell because he was the first D2 guy to sign. He's a Harlan Hill nominee, which is the D2 Heisman Trophy winner kind of equivalent. Incredibly productive this season. Had over 1,000 rushing yards, 12 touchdowns. The biggest thing for him is I think he adds more speed than almost anyone else that FAU will have in that running back room. He will likely be the fastest running back on that roster, and he is legitimately a home run threat. We talk about guys who can like sort of hit the home run and go 0 to 60 in the matter of milliseconds. That's Leonard Farrell. I think that he needs to be paired with somewhat more of like a power back to form that, I hate using it, thunder and lightning combination. But I think that's kind of where they need to live. But Leonard Farrell will be a day one contributor. I have got no doubts in my mind that he will be a major part of that running back room. And then Kenyon Garner, I mean, anytime I tell you that a guy had 15 sacks at the college football level, whether that be Division II, whether that be Division I, I think you sort of open your eyes a little bit and go, wow, that's a lot of sacks. And Kenyon Garner is definitely a little bit undersized. I think he's at like 235. He's definitely not the like NFL prototype for edge rusher, but with his speed, his pass rush moves, that's a day one pass rusher. And when you look at what FAU probably needs on the defensive side of the ball, guys who can get to the quarterback consistently is probably up there in terms of what they really need. And so I think that Kenyon Garner will have a role as a pass rusher for sure. And, if that's all he is, man, but he can get some sacks, FAU's been struggling in that department for years. They need a guy who can just be a sack artist. And I think that's what Kenyon Garner is he's just a true sack artist who's going to make plays on the ball.
If they can have two consistent pass rushers in Josh Roberts and Kenyon Garner, that is something that I don't think FAU has had in quite a while. Two guys who, when you throw them both on the field, they are making a quarterback's life tougher. That is big. I mean, we've seen. Eric Brantley and Wilkie Denau, to me, both are guys who have talent. They can rush the passer. I think the biggest issue has been consistency. And I think there's still talent there to be untapped in both of those guys. If they can get – there is – to me, that room has a lot of potential for next season. I'm excited about that. And in terms of Farrell, you're right. I do think we need to see another addition there or – retention, potentially get back Jamari Sands, get back KSD, bring in, one or two more guys. That's a nice, you have Ethan Irvin as well, who'll be a sophomore next year, who's developed. They'll get that. That's a nice little 5-pack right there. I think, a lot of people, we'll just see D2 and be like, oh, that stinks. Why, this is D1. What are we doing? Don't forget, Trinidad Chambliss for Ole Miss came from the D2 level. So, it's not just old FAU, just pillaging the D2 ranks, trying to scrape up. Yeah, Lane Kiffin did it too, and it got him a pretty good season before he jumped ship. So don't.
Did something happen this season with Lane Kiffin? I didn't know.
Yeah. You gotta give him an old Google. Give him an old Google. He's been a busy man since he left FAU. Ken was telling me he doesn't return his texts anymore. How could he not do that? How could he do such a thing? But yeah, I mean, you know, don't stick your nose up at the D2 players, folks. Any level, you can find a good baller at. You know, we had, and it's not just D2 level that we've seen so far in this transfer class. We got 4 junior college commits as well. Antoine Woody and Roman Garcia, both from Northeast Oklahoma A&M. I wonder which staff member got to hang out in Northeast Oklahoma and watch some dang good football. But man, that must be a tough place to get to. I don't know.
Fun fact: I'm pretty sure Northeast Oklahoma is in Miami. Oklahoma.
It is,
so
baby.
He did take a trip to Miami, just maybe not the Miami he was hoping to take a trip to.
No, I don't know. Yeah, you know, that's the glories of coaching. You know, everyone thinks it's glitz and glamour until you're in a Motel 6 in Miami, Oklahoma. So no, I hope our staff is not staying in Motel 6s. Let's get them at least a little Bonvoy membership and some Marriott points or something. But no, so yes, back to the point at hand here. We did get 2 recruits from Northeast Oklahoma A&M. Antoine Woody, a 5'10", 180-pound slot receiver, and Roman Garcia, 6'3", 260-pound defensive lineman. Roman is the second-ranked junior college player in Oklahoma and 13th overall currently in the transfer portal. Had 38 tackles, 13.5 tackles for loss, and 6 sacks. Kevin, what do you think the staff saw from these guys to go take a double dip from Northeast Oklahoma A&M? Not a powerhouse. I've never heard of them.
In terms of Roman Garcia, the biggest thing is his just explosiveness, his athletic ability. He still needs some work in terms of pass rush plan. He's definitely not a complete product. I think he's probably less of like a true pass rusher right now than Kenyon Garner is, for example. But he is a guy who can contribute immediately in the room in some way, especially with his effort, his motor, his explosiveness. There will be a spot for a guy like that. There's always a spot for a guy like that along the defensive line. I think it's a really under the radar but solid acquisition for a room that desperately needed multiple bodies. In terms of Woody, this is a guy who came from a really small high school to the junior college ranks to Northeast Oklahoma, put together a really good season, was an all-conference player. The biggest thing for him is his speed, his big play ability. We talked about it with Leonard Farrow. This is another guy who's going to make big plays as a receiver. His ability to track the ball, his ability to get open down the field. I think this is a day one deep threat in that wide receiver room. And we talked about what happens if they lose a guy or two in the wide receiver room. I think that's where a guy like Antoine Woody comes into play because he will contribute immediately in some form, in some way, shape, or form, whether it's replacing one of those guys, whether it's just adding on to those guys. There will be a spot for a guy like him in that room. And with his speed, I think he will be an immediate contributor.
Yeah, we saw a lot of guys in that wide receiver room get time last year. I think, I saw Woody had a 95-yard touchdown this season. So he's, like you mentioned, he'll have that big play threat. And pulling a guy off the bench that a defense necessarily isn't prepared for with a big play threat like that. That's big. So I'm interested to see, I saw it and I'm like, just a 5'10", 180-pound, only had 33 catches, 500 yards. But then you see like every game he had a 70-yard touchdown, a 60-yard touchdown. I couldn't find much film. I'm sure there's a Huddle link out there, but I couldn't find like games of I don't think they're streamed, unfortunately. But nevertheless, credit to FAU staff for going out there and finding them. I was saying I'm not the biggest, I think I'm a big football fan, but I have not heard much out of Northeast Oklahoma A&M. So that doesn't seem, it's not like, they're going to the big ones in Kansas. I'm sure they are, but for them to pluck 2 guys out of there, that's a good eye for talent. I'm interested to see how that works out. And then two other let's see here, 2 other two other junior college transfers. Cam Herring, who we wrote an article on FAU Owl's Nest, transferred in from East Central Community College, originally committed out of UTEP, 6'1", 165-pound defensive back. He's a guy who, I'm intrigued with. He gives me a lot of Therese Reed vibes. Not only they both played at UTEP, didn't have any crossover there during their time with each other. But I thought that was an interesting comparison. But the fact, Cam was telling me he's comfortable playing both in the slot, on the outside. I think I believe he's coming here to play outside DB or outside CB. But he's got experience all over the place. Played some safety as well. So, we'll get to we'll start with Cam. Kevin, what's your thoughts on Cam Herring?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is the size. When you get a guy who's 6'1", 6'2" at corner, you kind of check that box immediately, because the truth is you want anyone who can cover, but having size helps. Having the ability to be that kind of lengthy corner helps. And he knows how to use his length to disrupt the catch point. He's got really good ball skills. The PBUs, the disruptions, those things matter. I do sort of agree with you that I think his athleticism is not going to help him in the slot. I think he's better off on the outside. I think that his eyes, his just athleticism will help him on the outside. I think that there's a pathway for him to contribute in some way. I just don't know if it's as a starter or not. Regardless, right, I think the plan is to bring multiple guys into that room and have them all compete, because you're not just going to be in a position where it's one guy solves the issue, right? It's going to have to be a multi-person, everyone compete for the job kind of thing. I think there's a pathway for Cam Herring to compete, and that positional versatility will only help him get on the field. If he can play slot, if he can play safety, if he can, play other positions, there's a pathway for him to get on the field somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing with the DB. I think that's how Wendell Fallord ended up pushing out a lengthy collegiate career. Shout out to Wendell, had a senior day on last Saturday. But that was Wendell's thing. He was in a slot. He was at safety. I mean, he was only 5'9", but they had him at outside DB a couple times too. So when you can do that as a defensive back, I think that's your biggest strength. And then the last junior college commit, Avery Mayberry, tight end, who I think, we saw Mike Kirch have a big game against Rice, but then he completely went ghost. I think Mayberry is going to probably fill Kirch's shoes, and I'm interested to see, how that tight end room looks, how they utilize that in the offense, because there was glimpses this season where I was like, wow, they can do this. And Mayberry originally committed to Northern Arizona. He's a big guy, 6'4", 250 pounds. Had 7 touchdowns this past season for Pasadena Community College. So he's a red zone guy. I don't know necessarily how quickly he'll adjust, from Pasadena Community College to Division I, but, committed to Northern Arizona out of high school, so there's talent there. Kevin, what did you see from Mayberry, and what's your thoughts on the tight end? How can this offense unlock the tight end next season?
I think it's using what Kirch did so well last season in terms of his ability to push teams vertical with the seam routes. I think he had a ton of plays down the field that opens up some of that vertical stretch that stresses defenses out and allows guys like Easton Messer to dominate in the short and intermediate game, which is where Easton Messer is at his best. I think Javery Mayberry can kind of do that too. The biggest question is whether it translates, right? Like, he is still a junior college guy. You're not going to have a 100% hit rate with junior college guys, much like you will never have a 100% hit rate with transfer portal guys. But I think the thing that I really like about him is his versatility. He can line up in line. He can be attached to the line of scrimmage as like a more traditional tight end. He can line up in the slot. He's lined up outside for Pasadena. Like, there are a lot of different ways that he can play. And I think that's sort of the versatility that puts stress on defenses, because now you have to communicate across the board wherever he plays. He's a solid blocker, not a terrific blocker. I think he's more of a pass catcher now, but there are some skills as a route runner, as a pass catcher, that will help him in this offense. And I think in general, what what FAU needs from their tight ends are guys who can stretch the field and cause problems vertically, because you want to be able to open up some of that intermediate and short game for whether it's Easton Messer or another wide receiver, where they're able to make guys miss in space, and it's a little bit more open in that area of the field.
Yeah, the tight end to me over the past couple of years has gone ghost, but at times I feel like I've seen the vision, and I'm interested to see how a couple guys in that room develop. Martavis Collins, Reed McKeska, and then as well you add Mayberry to this room, maybe get one more piece in there, and then you got a nice little core four there to build on to next season. Closing out here, though, we obviously have our transfer class members that we just went for, and stay tuned. The transfer portal will probably keep on rolling here as we go throughout the offseason in terms of additions and subtractions. But in terms of our high school class, which National Signing Day, I believe, is Wednesday, tomorrow. Already, wow, time flies.
Tomorrow, and it'll stretch a couple of weeks. It is not just tomorrow. They can technically sign up until like middle of December, but
got it. Good to know. The more you know. But nevertheless, I feel like the high school class, you look at the guys, you've got 2 DBs, you've got 2 wide receivers, you've got a quarterback, and
a tight end and 2 offensive linemen.
Yeah. A tight end and 2 offensive linemen. So I feel like it's a pretty diverse, class. You don't got too, you're not top heavy anywhere. You're not overloading. And I think that's a smart approach in today's world. Kevin, baseline thoughts on the high school class so far, as a guy who, you grew up down here in the high school football world, New Era prep reporter. So what's your thoughts on this high school class?
I think it's a solid core. I think there are a lot of guys in this room who can contribute, whether it's will likely not be immediate, right? I think it always takes time for freshmen to get acclimated to college football. There are guys in this room who are going to be contributors, I think, at the college level. And we'll talk about all of them one by one, but like, this is a pretty good base to a high school recruiting class. I think you'll likely see more tomorrow. Would not put money on this being the only high school additions that FAU make, but in terms of what they've already got committed, there is a lot to like. And I think there are a few guys on this sort of list that really intrigue me, and guys who I think are like worthy projects or worthy acquisitions. Little spoiler, I think one of those wide receivers they added, really good football player, and a guy who will contribute very early on. But in general, this is a really good class. And now it just becomes a matter of how much can you develop them? How much can you get them in a college weight room? How much can you get them acclimated to the playbook? Because that first camp, whether it's spring camp or fall camp, it is going to be trial by fire for every single one of them. And it is not going to be an easy time for any of them, but you got to make sure that you push them along so that if they have to be contributors, they're ready to be contributors. Or, if they have to make the 2 deep, like we saw this year with a few of those guys, they're ready to make that jump onto the 2 deep.
100%. And I want to start with 2 of the DBs that we got, because those 2 guys I interviewed them, like, I think probably a couple weeks after Kitley got hired, and they have never left, which I think is, a testament to these guys buying into Kitley a little bit. Sean Williams, Justin Weatherall Williams, from Fairburn, Georgia, 6 foot 165. Had a big year last year, 64 tackles, this was numbers over the last 2 years: 64 tackles, 16 passes, and 4 picks over the past 2 seasons. And he had some big interest. He had interest from Pitt, Indiana, and SMU, offers from ECU, Memphis, and USF, as well as SMU. For Sean Williams. And as for Weatherall, he was a 2-way player, still is. I believe he's coming for sure to FAU as a defensive back, but, to have that 2-way skills, it's always important. And he's been another busy guy in 2 years: 69 tackles, 8 PBUs, 3 picks. And on the offensive side of the ball, 20 receptions, 345 yards, two scores. Weatherall had offers from Tulane, Army, UNLV, and Oregon State Patrols, FAU. And he was previously making visits under the Herman regime and remained committed through Kitley. What's your thoughts on our DBs committed, Kevin?
Sean Williams, a little bit more of a safety to me than a corner, and he plays a little bit more deep safety in high school. The thing I really like is just the physical profile, the size, the athleticism. Typically, when you're looking at high school guys, that's the biggest thing that you look for is the physical profile and how that translates with their current skills. Because the truth is, these are not going to be the same players that are going to play for you. They're going to develop, they're going to grow, they're going to change their technique, their footwork, all of those things. I think Sean Williams needs a year to be anything, because just right now, he's kind of just this kind of incomplete player. He's a guy who's going to likely need a redshirt year, but I think there's a lot to like in terms of the size and the athleticism to be a deep safety. He's got really good coverage skills. That's one thing. His eyes, his coverage ability, those things translate. In terms of Weatherall, a little bit more undersized. He's under 6 foot. He's more of a corner. I think with that size, he's likely going to be a slot cornerback in college. He's not going to be more of the outside corner. Again, I kind of like his ability in zone coverage, his coverage skills. He's a good athlete. You're going to notice a trend. Those two things, coverage or athleticism and physical profile, those things are littered across the board on this list, and I think for good reason. Weatherall, I think, again, another guy who's going to need a year of development, but I think there's a pathway for him to be a contributor at some point in kind of the first 2 years of his college career.
Yeah, DB's a room that if they can play right away, they'll get snaps. We saw Damon Allen right away this year. He was the guy who was able to come in here and make an impact. And so, I think that room is one that if they can ball, there's a spot for you. We'll see if that is indeed for them. It's tough because they are going to be recruiting heavily on the defensive side of the ball in the transfer portal. So I don't know how much, there'll be a job for them right away, but we'll see. At wide receiver, though, a pair of 6'2", really, really talented wide receivers, in my opinion. Nick St. Joseph, Elijah West. I think both of them are guys who can contribute right away. We saw Brandon Hoke can do it right away. Jake Carr got some run, but they gotta earn the trust. They gotta be able to come in right away and do that. I feel like Nick Saint, to me, is a guy who probably will have a little bit more of an edge to play right away than maybe Elijah. But Kevin, I'm curious, what do you think about the wide receiver duo?
I actually like Elijah West a little bit more. I think Elijah West is a guy who FAU kind of stole. I watched his film earlier. That guy has a ton of athleticism, a lot of short area quickness. Anytime you get a 6'2" wide receiver with some athleticism, they both got athleticism, to be clear. They both ran track in high school. But the thing about Elijah West is he knows how to use his body to make plays, and he knows how to use his body in route running. I don't think he's a complete player, but in terms of like what you're looking for to be an immediate contributor as a deep threat receiver, I think that's something Elijah West can do pretty quickly. In terms of Nick St. Joseph, again, a guy who was a track star for Miami Northwestern, participated in high jump, the 400 meter, the 200 meter. Again, another size and speed take at the position. I think he needs to clean up his route running a bit to become an immediate contributor in that room. But the athleticism, you can see it all over his film. That's a guy who I'm willing to take a bet on, because there aren't a lot of athletic wide receivers who are ready to make that kind of jump. That guy's got it for sure.
Pair of talented wide receivers, and that they could have like the DBs have an opportunity to win a role right away if we do see some departures in that wide receiver room. Fingers crossed we don't, but there will be talent there to back it up. Two more additions on the offensive side of the ball. You got your lefty lucky quarterback, Jeremiah Daoud. But before we get into him, offensive lineman Alejandro Schmidt from West Broward. Originally a Pembroke Pines native, 6'6", 305 pounds. He had some big interests up, and I was, potentially watching. Is this a guy who might maybe decommit? But no, he looks to still be here. A big physical offensive lineman. We didn't see any freshmen win jobs right away this year. It's very tough to win an offensive line starting job as a freshman. Is Schmidt more developmental, Kevin, or are we looking at a 6'6", 305-pound freshman that can compete right away?
So they have two offensive linemen in this class, in Schmidt and then Aiden Buchanan. They're
That's
both
right.
developmental. Schmidt has better size right now. We'll get to Buchanan later. Schmidt, I think, is an offensive tackle with athleticism who can move and climb to the second level well. I just think he needs to add a little bit more to his frame. And I think that's going to be the biggest thing is you look at a guy who's 305 pounds, 6'6", you kind of want to get him up to about 320. And so we're talking about 15 pounds of weight, about where I feel like we really feel comfortable about where he's at. That might take a year. Like, just being honest, that typically does take a year to add that weight and put together a frame around it. There will be a pathway for him to play at some point early on in his college career. I just don't know if it'll be in year one. Aiden Buchanan is kind of just a little bit more difficult to project. He's listed at like 265 on 24/7, a lot more undersized, truthfully. And, I think he's got good motor, he's got good power, but when you're talking about a guy who maybe has to add 40 pounds to get to that level, unless you feel comfortable with him playing 280, that's going to be a question for the staff, not for me, truthfully. I think Aiden Buchanan is just going to need a little bit more time. And that's why I just kind of struggle to know what the projection is there, because we've seen guys like this take a jump in year one and be ready in year two. We've seen guys who maybe take 2 years to get ready, and it's like kind of more as when they're a redshirt sophomore, they're ready to compete for a spot or ready to really learn what it's like to be a college football player. It's kind of just more of a question mark for Aiden Buchanan. But watching his film, I can see why the staff really likes him. There's stuff you can't teach on his film. And it's the hope that those things continue to stay there when you add the weight and you make him a little bit more of a complete player.
Yeah, the offensive line is, they need help, but it's tough when, you got to put on 20 pounds, like you mentioned. You got to put on 40 pounds, like you mentioned. So I like the developmental side of it, though. I'm interested to see how many of the linemen they signed last class stay and see how they do developmental-wise this year. Tight end Owen Pollock, before we get into the lucky lefty Jeremiah Daoud. Owen Pollock, 6'4", 225-pound, from Sunbury, Ohio. Big Walnut High School. It's an awesome high school name. I wonder if they're the Big Walnuts, or if they're like. Anyway, that's my mind moving. This is another guy. This tight end room. It's going to be wide open. McKeska and Collins will have a chance to win a job. But Pollock as well could come right in and win a job. Had a couple offers: App State, Ball State, Bowling Green, Buffalo. Stuck with FAU pretty much the whole time throughout this season. Tight end, I feel like, is a position where, especially when you're coming in 6'4", 225, only, I feel like in FAU's offense, he doesn't have to be super bulky. I feel like he could play in passing downs right away. Kevin, what do you think?
Yeah, I think Owen Pollock, can play immediately. He's got good size. He's maybe a little bit underweight at 225. We talk about him and Mayberry, who's close to about 245, 250. But there's a lot to like on film for Pollock. He's a mover. He can contribute. It's going to be in the receiving game early for him, because he traditionally lines up a little bit more in the slot instead of on the line of scrimmage in high school. But this was a guy who had P4 interest from West Virginia, had a lot of group of 5 interest. This is a guy who's going to, I think, find a role somewhere early on, whether it's on special teams, whether it's on offense, and maybe it is as a true freshman, maybe it is as a redshirt freshman. Again, true freshmen, they'll get 4 games before they have to redshirt. I think this is a guy who may play in 4 games before you make that decision.
We'll see. And then the lucky lefty himself, Jeremiah Daoud. He's been, when he first committed, that was like right when right around, the first couple of months of of Zach Kittley. And I was, everyone's kind of like who the first quarterback commit for Zach Kittley. He's a lefty. This is exciting. He'll be the heir apparent to Caden Veltkamp. I'm interested to see, is he a guy who, we saw Magwood get some snaps this year. Is he a guy who they view as a third string right away as a freshman next year? Or is he more of a red shirt, a Carson Kruger type of, take your time and see where it goes type of quarterback? What's your thoughts on Daoud, Kevin?
It's not going to be year one. I'm just going to be honest. He's not ready to play year one. There's still some stuff he has to learn from the quarterback perspective. The thing that I like about him is that we're talking about a guy who went to Allen, which, in case you don't know, Allen is like the biggest high school in Texas. It's nationally ranked. They've developed some quarterbacks, spoiler alert, but he went there, he started, and he played. And he threw for 25 touchdowns, only threw 4 interceptions, threw for about 2,500 yards. This is a guy who's going to be able to contribute. Again, it's a little weird watching him play because he's a left-handed quarterback, but I think that this is a guy who's going to contribute at some point. The biggest thing that I think we need is we need a little bit more footwork. We need just a little bit more technique thing. We need to get him just a little bit better in terms of analyzing the field in front of him. But there's a lot of things that he's good at initially. There are a lot of things that he will be able to do at this level. I will say the thing I love about him, he kind of like reminds me, I'm going to use this and everyone's going to go, what do you mean? He's kind of Tua-like for me.
Oh, boy.
I get it. Left-handed quarterback. It's the easiest thing in the world to go left-handed quarterback. Kind of reminds me of Tua. What do we think, guys? But kind of does remind me of Tua. Doesn't have like the strongest arm, but has good accuracy. Can play out of structure, kind of like early day Tua can. There are a lot of things I like. And I think that there will be a pathway for him to be a contributor at some point. And I'm kind of excited to see what Zach Kittley and some of that coaching staff can do with a guy like this, because this feels like a guy who probably shouldn't be at FAU, but that's FAU's reward, because I think that he has power for talent with a little bit more development.
100%. You look at his size as a junior, he was 6'3", 200. I'm sure now he's probably pushing 6'4" by now. And he's probably 210-ish, maybe a couple more pounds. He has a solid frame for a big quarterback. Could be the heir apparent to Caden Veltkamp in a season or so. That rounds out the offensive high school recruits for the Owls. There was one while we were on the air. Travis Jackson, a defensive back from Palm Beach Central, announced his commitment. So that makes 3 cornerbacks, 5'11", 170-pound defensive back. So that's a third DB and a local one at that, Palm Beach Central. I know a guy who probably be happy about that one, Kevin. I know.
I feel like we know a guy, and maybe I should text him after this.
Hey, you know what? I'm sure he'll be overjoyed. But congrats to Travis, and that rounds out the high school recruiting class here for the Owls so far. Like you mentioned, Kevin, it's possible we do see some more here over the next 24 hours and into the next couple of weeks. Same thing with the transfer portal. Stay posted, stay frosty to FAU Owls Nest, FAU_Owls_Nest on X. So make sure to stay tuned to that. Kevin, any final thoughts on the football offseason before we say goodbye?
Yeah, first of all, shout out Rick Henderson for kind of helping us out with some of the list stuff. But also, I think that it's a pretty good group. I'm kind of excited to see what comes next, because we've got probably about a month until the transfer portal opens. We're going to get really weird here in about a month's time, but it's kind of fun right now. It may not be as fun in January, but
hey, we'll see. And I agree, Kevin. Shout out to Rick. You stole my thunder. But yes, no. The OG producer of the Owl's Nest, keeping us posted. All this information that me and Kevin spit to you would not be possible if Rick didn't set us up. And also, folks, Rick will be giving you guys live coverage of FAU men's basketball this weekend versus FGCU. That's big news. I'm sure I'll have some great photos for you guys as well. So shout out to the OG historian, founder in chief of the Owls Nest, Rick Henderson. And folks, thank you so much for tuning into Inside the Borough. As always, we appreciate you very much for supporting our grassroots coverage of Florida Atlantic University athletics. For Kevin Fielder, I'm Robbie Listella. We'll see you next time, probably talking about men's basketball, hopefully in a good mood. We can't have 3 straight losses to FGCU. I don't know what I'll do if that happens. Until next time, I'm Robbie Listella.